Okay, in Halo Reach, there's something weird about the Cloud Skull that we couldn't find any clear-cut information of online, and it's definitely something that Luke and I thought we needed to dig into a little bit deeper, because there is some odd stuff going on with this specific skull. Now, ever since skulls were first introduced in Halo 2, there's always been something a little bit ominous of a skull that is used as a game modifier, which can really shake things up at times. And whether they have cool features like making explosions even more explosive, or changing up audio dialogue, fans have really gotten used to seeing a lot of the same type of skulls pop up across each game. But then this brought us back to a very interesting experience that happened last week when we were playing Halo Reach Firefight. Okay, let's start off with a little bit of context. With Halo Infinite set to release later on this year, Luke, Dim, and I all were jumping in to quite a few games of Firefight so that we could practice fighting off the Covenant and also get better at Halo so that one day we can actually become the #1 best Halo YouTubers and finally dethrone Hidden Xperia and his great Halo content from the top. I swear, one day will be good enough. But in the process of all of this, while we were playing Halo Reach Firefight, as per normal, as you progress through various rounds, more skulls get added to the overall list. And that's where we noticed something very interesting. Now, prior to this specific time where we were playing Firefight, we hadn't spent too much time in Reach Firefight since all the way back in the 360 days. So that's probably why we didn't catch this until just now when we were finally revisiting it. But in the second round, we noticed the Cloud Skull was activated. But here's the weird thing. If you look at Halo Reach's total skulls, or all of the skulls available to turn on in Firefight mode, or even campaign, the Cloud Skull doesn't actually exist. Actually, if you look through all of the Halo Reach skulls, there's Iron, Black Eye, Tough Luck, Catch, Famine, Thunderstorm, Tilt, Mythic Blind, Grunt Birthday Party, Cowbell, I Would Have Been Your Daddy, and Fog. So this is where our whole conspiracy mystery started, as we made the realization that the Cloud Skull doesn't exist in Halo, the Master Chief Collection. Now, right away, we asked Dim about this because he has this weird photographic memory with a lot of Halo-related topics, and he could have sworn he remembered the Cloud Skull being a pretty important piece to the skulls from Halo Reach. But when we asked him what the difference between the Fog Skull and the Cloud Skull was, we kind of all collectively realized that there wasn't actually a difference between the two skulls. Cloud and Fog, as far as we could remember, did the same thing. It disabled the motion tracker in campaign, or in this case, Firefight. So after us kind of realizing that it was odd that when we were looking through the menus, we couldn't actually see the Cloud Skull anywhere, but when we were playing Firefight, we definitely heard the voice actor announce that the Cloud Skull was now activated.
Cloud on.
So it only presented us with more questions when we went back to look to see what the difference between Cloud and Fog was, just to find that there was no Cloud Skull at all, just this elusive Fog Skull in its place. Now, Dim made some jokes thinking that maybe the Cloud Skull was a Mandela effect, and we were just misremembering some skull that never actually existed. So we loaded up in Firefight again to see if the skull would activate again, and sure enough, the Cloud Skull not only was a voice line introducing the skull's activation, but also when we held down the menu button where it shows the description of all of the skulls, we saw the Cloud Skull with the line, "Keep your eyes peeled." On top of that, the Cloud Skull also has the same logo or symbol on the forehead as Fog, and then to make it even weirder, on the screen when it popped up that Cloud was enabled, the text on the bottom left corner said Fog enabled. This is some low-stakes conspiracy we're jumping into here, but it gets more interesting. So, as it turns out, when Halo Reach was added into MCC, they made the decision to rename the Cloud Skull to the Fog Skull to be more consistent with the other titles in Halo. Okay, that makes sense, that's fair, but then we were interested in looking through the history of name changes of this skull in the first place, because why was it changed in general from the Fog Skull to the Cloud Skull? And this is where the history around the skull gets kind of spicy. First things first, the Fog Skull was introduced in Halo 3, acting the same way as we remember, it just disables the motion tracker. And then while Halo 3 ODST didn't have a motion tracker, thus there was neither a Fog Skull or a Cloud Skull in the game, Halo Reach was the first game to see the actual name change from Fog to Cloud. So obviously when they ported over the game into MCC and they added Firefight mode, the audio line was still intact from the original Reach days where Cloud was enabled, and they just changed the text text to say Fog in-game. But upon checking and obviously double checking for this video, in the original Halo Reach, it was in fact called Cloud. None of us were going crazy and misremembering some skull that may or may not have existed in Halo. We'll save that mystery for Halo 3's Cortana skull. But then the history after Halo Reach is also kind of interesting. In Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, which was a remake that introduced new skulls, this time around the skull was known as the Fog skull once again. So between Halo Reach and Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, there was that reversal, but then with Halo 4, which released 1 year after Combat Evolved Anniversary, it reverted back to Cloud Skull again. And then, as we know, with Master Chief Collection, they obviously chose to favor the Fog Skull as the name and reverted it again from their Halo 4 Cloud Skull back to the Fog Skull. And in the menus in Master Chief Collection, the Halo 4 skull is once again updated from the name Cloud to Fog. And then we went ahead and checked Halo 5 Guardians, and that game went and stuck with MCC, keeping it as the Fog Skull. It's really funny when we can just kind of fall down these types of rabbit holes on a very esoteric topic like Halo skulls, but we thought it was really interesting that there was this name change so many times throughout the course of Halo. And to this day, we still don't actually have a clear-cut explanation as to why this skull was changed in its name so many times over the years. It's obvious that 343 wanted to keep some consistency in MCC, but the fact that they had even changed it themselves and then changed it back prior to MCC's release and then changed it again is definitely something interesting. But the first time that the skull was changed was technically during the Bungie era. So we decided to reach out to Bungie employees and see if we could find some sort of answer as to why the skull had seen a name change, at least between Halo 3 and Halo Reach, which maybe could give us some sort of insight to speculate as to why the name was continuously changed again after Bungie left Halo and 343 took over. I mean, at this point, we're talking about 4 name changes on a single Halo skull. So we reached out to former Bungie designer Dan Miller, who, if you don't remember, a while back shared some information about the cut Halo 3 Guardian. It would have been a whole campaign mission in Halo 3 that ended up getting scrapped. It was some really cool stuff, and we really appreciated Dan Miller answering all of our questions back then, and sure enough, Dan Miller was willing to shed some insight with us, though it seemed like he wasn't actually too sure himself as to why the Fog Skull was renamed between Halo 3 and Halo Reach to the Cloud Skull. Dan Miller saying he had no idea, but if he had to speculate, he thought maybe it could have been some sort of localization thing, so that sent us down a whole nother rabbit hole of trying to figure out if possibly there was some reason that the skull name was changed in other localized versions of Halo. Now, we were limited to how many Halos we had access to checking and then figuring out the translation to. Fortunately, Luke was able to just check the German name for the skull across the Halo games and found the translations in German to be consistent with the English translations, with it being Fog in Halo 3, Cloud in Halo Reach, Fog in CEA, Cloud in Halo 4, and so on and so forth. We reached out to Tepeg from Halo Creation, the #1 best French Halo community, and he checked the translations for us as well, and those translations also lined up with the English translations and the German translations. We even asked one of the greatest Halo Reach speedrunners of all time, Pedro Gas, to check the Spanish translation, and sure enough, it also lined up with the English, French, and German versions, respectively, in each Halo. Now, obviously, we didn't have access to every single language to check to try to figure out why the skulls could be renamed the way that they are named, but we have seen instances in other game franchises where some sort of word ends up getting changed in one version and then universally changed across the board to fit into some sort of localization. We also asked one other Bungie employee on Twitter, and I got this response: "The answer lies in the fog, F-O-G," and then a string of numbers, some random words, some dollar signs. But when I did ask that if we should be going tinfoil hat conspiracy, diving into this like the ODST glyphs, or if it was just a joke, he just responded with yes. Then I said, "Wait, that was a this or that question," and he responded with yes again. And then I asked if I could put the DM exchange in the video because it was hilarious. He said maybe. So we really were running into a dead end with this mystery, as we couldn't figure out, at least to any official capacity, why the Fog Skull was renamed to the Cloud Skull, and then subsequently why it was renamed back to the Fog Skull, back to the Cloud Skull, and back to the Fog Skull again. So at this point, we're kind of just stuck at some basic level speculation points, but the search for the answers was kind of one of the more exciting and fun things to dive into. We really like to just explore any level of mystery, especially when we can fall down some obscure rabbit hole like the name of a single skull. Now, speculation-wise, the Cloud Skull seems fitting as a name, just as the idea of clouding someone's judgment, perhaps, and the double meaning between literally having your radar turned off. Maybe the Fog Skull sounded too much like a different word, or maybe there was some big localization thing that played a role into it that we haven't caught on to just yet. But we do think the most mysterious one out of all of this is the fact that Combat Evolved Anniversary switched to Fog, while Halo 4 switched back to Cloud. Now, that could have just been a basic oversight by the team working on Halo 4, since they were building that game off of Halo Reach's engine. And maybe the shift from Combat Evolved Anniversary in the first place was to have a universal skull name across all of the Halos, but then they just forgot to update it for Halo 4 until its MCC release. So then we decided to dig in a little bit deeper to see if there's any other types of obscure mentions of Fog, or just other places where we can learn a little bit more about the Fog or Cloud Skull. In Halo Wars 1, the Fog Skull was present, and that released after Halo 3, but of course before ODST and Reach. And interestingly enough, though, the Fog Skull had a completely different icon, looking like this instead. And in Halo Wars 1, the Fog Skull would make it so there would be no minimap and the final score would increase. And there were plans to have the Fog Skull once again in Halo Wars 2, this time with a different logo, and it would have actually disabled the HUD, though this skull was cut in development. But no signs of the Cloud Skull showing up in any of the spin-off Halo games either. Okay, so at this point, we definitely were hitting a brick wall with any new information regarding the Halo Cloud Skull. So if we were going to find anything, we decided we would just jump into the rabbit hole of looking at old discussions and videos online, and even then, we still didn't find too much to go off of, but let's get you caught up to speed on what we did find in our search. So if you decide to dive yourself face first into the search for any type of information, you already know what stones we turned over at one point or another already. Firstly, we did look up Comic-Con Halo Reach's panel where they showed off Firefight in depth, and while there was no acknowledgement given to the fact that Fog was renamed to the Cloud Skull, we can see that in the menus, at least on the build that they had at Comic-Con in summer of 2010, the Cloud Skull already had its name by this point. I also, along the way, ran into the first ever announcement that the forklift would be drivable by Bungie.
Brand new vehicle you guys have never seen before. I'll just run over here real quick. The forklift.
And then I also ran into the first ever announcement of Sprint being added into Halo, also at that same panel.
Then I go and I pick it up, and now I can sprint.
I don't know, there's just something really fun about diving down these rabbit holes and finding these little moments. We spent hours upon hours digging through some really scuffed old footage from various events just to see if there was any weird oddity in the builds that were used to demo the game, or if maybe some Bungie employee talking in the background maybe just elaborated for a split second that the skull was renamed. We didn't get any luck there, but we did find some pretty great old footage from over the years. We reached out to Vengeful Vadim, who's done a lot of stuff on the original Halo Reach beta and just explored the files and the menus that are in that game. And all the way back in the beta build of the game, if you accessed the skull tab in the campaign section, there actually wouldn't be any skulls available to look at, and it would take you to this Halo 3 looking menu. So definitely nothing was implemented in the May build that was used in the Halo Reach beta that was played amongst a bunch of people. Also, interestingly enough, back when Firefight was first announced, they did show off from time to time Firefight Versus mode, which was a game type that ended up getting cut from the final release of the game. And besides this one video I found of an IGN employee pronouncing Gruntpocalypse in one of the most unique ways I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, the Gruntocalypse Will the Grundocalypse?
The only thing that actually stood out as interesting was this one gameplay demo I discovered from the Firefight versus mode, where at the bottom of the screen you can see the skulls that are activated, and the Cloud Skull is one of those skulls, though the radar itself is not disabled, which does bring into question as to whether or not the Cloud Skull was actually fully implemented into Firefight mode at this point, or maybe did the Cloud Skull have a different purpose this late in development and they changed it to have the purpose of the Fog Skull somewhere around then. That's just full speculation based off of one minuscule thing, but it at least is a question that we can look into to maybe find answers down the road. Then we jumped into forum discussions, YouTube comment section discussions, anything of people talking about the new Cloud Skull at the time, just to see if there was anyone asking the question. A few people did bring up the fact that they were intrigued by the Cloud Skull and what it could do, and some people discussing the likelihood that the Cloud Skull would be like the Fog Skull, but none of these conversations really went anywhere. I did find this really interesting article all the way back from 2010 that says, quote, "Bungie has spiced things up this time around with some totally new skull entries for Halo Reach." And then it talks about the new skull, the Cloud Skull, which is exactly like the Fog Skull, and it's the only new skull in the game. So it really is at this point where we're kind of just stuck at a dead end without having any real answers, and we're only left to speculate on what could actually be the true reason that this skull was renamed so many times. I don't know. If you guys have any ideas or any knowledge as to why the skull was renamed, leave it in the comments down below, even if it's just a speculative idea or a place that we should look next. It's just one of those things that we're just really interested in, even though it's such an obscure, insignificant part of the Halo universe. It's still cool to us. Do please make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Take a second, double check, because you don't want to be missing out on this content that we've been putting out on very specific things like a Cloud Skull. But otherwise, that's it for today. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video.